I don't think I'm as talented as this writer or that writer. I think I'll never make it because I can't do this character thing or that setting thing. Tell me, how many times have you had these or similar thoughts? I bet it's quite a bit, right? Alright, let me tell you a quick story. A great writer friend and I, we have these regular check-in calls where we talk about our works in progress, our pain points and our struggles. We do some brainstorming or cheerleading or whatever else is needed or comes up in the conversation. Well, this one day on one of these calls, Maggie suddenly blurts out, "You're a better writer than I am." I was so astounded. I couldn't even respond as she went on to list all the things that I am supposedly great at. But that got me to thinking, what determines who is better and who is not? What is good enough? What does it actually mean? And why is it that we can never seem to see our own strengths? Because while Maggie thought that I'm the better writer between the two of us, I thought exactly the same about her. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Which makes you a better writer? Talent or skill? And how much does your talent and your skill actually matter when it comes to writing that story? And finally, how you can recognize and celebrate your own strengths while improving on your weaknesses. So let's get to it. Hello and welcome to Salome's Writer Therapy, where you and your writing connect. Alright, so we know when it comes to writing, there are some people who we call talented and others who are skilled at writing. Talented in this case means you have an intuitive knack for writing, and skilled means that you have learned the art of writing. You agree? Yes? Great. Now I'm going to take it a step further. Writing as a whole can be broken down into two sides. On the one side, we have the craft of writing, and on the other side, we have the story of writing. Now, story of writing in this case is not the same as storytelling, because I would think that storytelling goes under the craft of writing. So it's a bit different, but I'll explain them in a minute. Now, you and any writer that you know will quote unquote be good at one of these sides, craft or story, or in some jealousy inducing cases, be good at both craft and story. And that being good at is determined from either your talent or your skill. So now is the time to look at yourself. Now I know it can be scary to do self-reflection, but just bear with me on this. You will be glad you did, I promise. Okay, so the craft side of writing is the way we string ideas, elements, and rules of writing together to make a story. These are things like story structure, scene construction, paragraph and sentence construction, grammar and punctuation rules, and all the other how-to pieces that take events, characters, and places and turns them into cohesive stories. Now, these how-to pieces that I'm referring to here is like, how do I write dialogue? How do I write theme? How do I write relationships? Those types of how-to pieces that you will need to craft that cohesive story. Now, the story side of writing, remember I said it's different than storytelling. So the story side of writing that I'm referring to in this episode is the ideas and elements that make up the story. These are the things like the world building elements, the plot and character ideation and generation, character arcs, plot progression, and all the other elements that create the puzzle pieces that would eventually, with the craft of writing, become a cohesive story. So this is how you create your characters. This is, the personality types that you draw from, or their life experiences. What does the world look like? How's the weather? All those kinds of elements. That's the story side of writing. So take a look at yourself and ask these two questions. Number one, am I good at writing the craft side of stories? Or number two, am I good at writing the story side? And here I want you to be honest with yourself. The best thing you can do for your improvement is to acknowledge both your strengths and your weaknesses. And remember, you are good at something. I promise, you don't suck at everything. Otherwise, you wouldn't be writing in the first place. Now, ask yourself this. Does the good at that you've determined in the previous questions, that good at writing craft or story, does that good at refer to talent or does it refer to skill? In other words, do you approach craft or story intuitively? Like, do you just know how to do it? Are you talented at it? Or have you learned enough that you're comfortable with your skills at it? And if you want to get more detailed, you can break the craft side and the story side down into their elements and answer the questions about talent versus skill for each element that makes up the craft and the story side of your writing. So this way you can drill down further to see where your strengths and weaknesses are. Alright, now that you know what you're good at, I want you to take a moment and pat yourself on the back. No, seriously, pat yourself on the back. I want you to celebrate your strengths. You've probably heard it 1,000 times that writing is hard. So even if you're good at only one thing, like I can create relevant characters, or I can create vivid settings, or I'm good at grammar and punctuation, then you have something to be proud of. And if you're good at even one thing, then you are good enough to make it as a full-time writer or author someday. Just continue to improve. Get more things that you become good at. Alright, now that you've identified and celebrated your strengths, let's see how we can improve those areas you're not so good at yet. First, how can you improve your skill at the craft of writing? Now, there are two things that I would suggest you do. The first thing is to determine which area of the craft you are struggling with or want to improve. You want to pick one to start with, because if you just say, I want to improve my writing craft, it can be very overwhelming to try everything at once. So take it one step at a time. And the second thing that I suggest you do is to read a book on that thing, or take a course, or study articles or resources about it. The key thing with improving your skill at the craft of writing is you have to implement what you learn. And remember, you don't have to do everything at once. If you need to focus on one thing at a time, that's okay. Let's say, for example, you struggle with sticking to your chosen narrative POV. Maybe you go from first person present to first person past randomly throughout your story. So after you study that area of the craft, you learn how it's supposed to be done. You have to stick to one narrative POV within a given scene or the overall story. So the third thing you need to do to improve your skill at the craft of writing is to implement it. You practice it, or you go through your story and change all the instances where you didn't do it that way. And that's how you improve your skill at the craft of writing. You determine what needs improvement by studying books, resources, or courses about it, and by implementing the things that you've learned. Now, how do you improve your skill at the story side of writing? Now, there are 4 things that I would suggest you do to improve your skill at the story side. Now, the first 2 things are the same as the craft side of writing, which is determine which area of story you're struggling with or want to improve, read a book on it or take a course or study articles or resources about it. Step 3 is an extra step that might also help you, and that is to get templates or workbooks for the parts of your story that you struggle with. Now, these templates should have prompts of some kind that would help you to figure out the story parts that you're not so good at yet. This is like character templates or workbooks, world building workbooks, plot workbooks, etc. And step 4 is implement them. Take the things that you have learned or created from those prompts and use them in your story. And if you are looking for workbooks or templates on different story elements, you can check out some free to download workbooks that I've created in the description below. I also have a work in progress planner in various themes that will help you to keep everything you need to write your story together and organized. And if you're watching this episode when it comes out, I'm running a special until 14 February where you get 25% off all the romance themed planners. So be sure to go check out my Etsy shop, Salome's Writer Therapy. The link is also in the description below. Alright, so you improve your skill at the story side of writing by determining what needs improvement, by studying books, resources, or courses about that thing, by using templates and workbooks for prompts, and by implementing what you've learned and created. Alright, so when it comes to your talent at writing, whether it's the craft or the story side, can you even improve it? Well, you might think that talent is something you are born with, and if you don't have talent, then you're out of luck. But I'm here to tell you, you can actually improve your talent. It's about your intuition, right? When you become an intuitive writer, then you are seen as talented because you know how to do it. Now, there are 2 ways that you can improve your talent. The first one is read good stories. Through reading good stories, you will organically ingest good practices in both the craft and story if you pay attention to what you're reading. And the second way to improve your talent is to improve your skill. If you are skilled enough at something, it will become intuitive after time. So, to improve your talent at writing, the craft, or the story side, you need to read good stories and improve your skill at those things. Now, remember to implement the things you learn. You won't improve if you just do research. You have to do it or practice. Now, finally, let me answer the question that I posed at the start of this episode. Which makes you a better writer? Talent or skill? And does it even matter? So many people will say that if you're talented, then that automatically makes you a better writer. There are famous people who say that, right? But I want you to think about it differently. Now, I've taken all the time in this episode to talk about the two sides of writing. So let's look at a quick case study. Let's say writer A is talented at the story side of writing, but not in the craft of writing. Writer B is not talented at either the craft or the story. Now let's say writer A continued to write with their talent alone, while writer B has taken the time to improve their skill at both the craft and the story. Who would you say ends up being a better writer? Now normally you'd say it depends on writer A's talent, right? But we're not just talking about writing overall. We've broken it down into separate sides, and we've established that writer A has no talent in the craft side of writing, while writer B has developed the skill in both the craft side and the story side. So my argument would be that writer B will end up being the better writer over time. But to be honest, it doesn't really matter, because firstly, if you improve your skill, then you become talented over time. So talent that you are born with is somewhat overrated. Not entirely, because talented writers do have that initial advantage, but if they don't commit to improving their skill, then someone without talent can become a better writer than they are if they are committed to improvement. But it also doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, we are not in an industry where it's conducive to compare ourselves to other writers or authors. Writing is art. Art is subjective. Subjective means it doesn't matter if you're better than everyone else or not. There will always be readers that will appreciate or even love what you write, regardless of your talent or skill levels. As long as you stay connected to yourself and your writing, meaning to be self-aware of your strengths and weaknesses, and to commit to improving yourself and your writing, then you will succeed. So remember to celebrate your strengths and not to compare your journey to someone else's. Improve where you can, one step at a time. Now, before I go, if you want some help to improve your writing, then click on the screen or in the link in the description below to check out the playlist I created on the 4 key elements of writing, where I talk about how you can write the key elements, which is conflict, character, plot, and setting. So, until next time, may your creativity flow freely and your fingers dance upon the keys. Keep writing with joy and stay connected. Cheers.